सर्वलोकानां भिषजे भवरोगिणां निधये सर्वविद्यानां दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः. मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम्. नमः सभाभ्यः सभापतिभ्यश्च. Honorable Chairman of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Sri N. Ramanujaji, Director, Sri H.N., Executive Director of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Sri H.N. Suresh, Deputy Director, Mr. Ashok Kumar, other members of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and also the CEO of ISKCON, Dr. Madhu Pandita Das ji. I am most honored to speak on this occasion in this afternoon session with respect to the navigational sciences in the Vedas. In fact, I would like to give you a very brief introduction with respect to this research, how it was done almost 15 years ago. It was a CSIR project started by Professor Mashlekar and no other than Dr. B.V. Subrayappa, who was the General President of the International Congress of the History and Philosophy of Science related to Science Division of UNESCO, was involved in that project. Just then I had completed my doctorate and he inducted me into that project. In fact, that project was going on from 87. I joined in 94. By the time, scholars from all parts of India were exploring this, what you call it as the indigenous traditions of ancient Indian navigation, purely from the scientific dimension and perspective. It was not just a table work as we do with respect to other, paper presentations where you work in home and then you work on the table and present papers. This was a field work also, for which I extensively traveled across the length and breadth of India. And also I traveled to Andaman Nicobar Islands and Lakshadweep and other places to record the experiences of the sailors and the navigators who have been engaged in this navigation for not less than 3,000 to 4,000 years. So initially, as a matter of fact, I covered the primary sources with respect to ancient Indian navigation called the Nauka Vijnana or Nauka Vijnana. And the next slide, please. And the sources which covered with respect to that was the four Vedas and also the Yaskas Nirukta for the etymology of the navigational words and the Sanskrit grammar text that of Panini, Patanjali and Bhartrhari and also that of Bhattoji Dikshita, Amarakosha of Amarasimha. In fact, owing to paucity of time, I will be speaking only the salient features of the navigation sciences as reflected in the Vedas, but the general extensive study was done from the times of the Vedas up to 10th century AD, covering the text of Dhanapala's Tilakamanjari. That means it spanned over almost in the latest antiquity as mentioned by George Feurenstein, Subhash Kirk and David Frawley. It goes to the times of the Vedas, that is 7000 BCE to 1000 AD. So almost it covered 9,000 years, and I reviewed around 60 texts and culled out around 1,300 references, of which I selected 250 words exclusively connected with navigation, and all of them commencing with the word Nakara. The reason being, see, the Nauka, the word Nauka, later it became an apabhramsha of navigation, Nau or navigation. Nau Gatihi became navigation. Like that you can trace any number of words from Sanskrit to English and other languages. Apart from that, the secondary sources were, I reviewed, and of course it was a team, we reviewed archaeological excavations done in various parts of India and also in Pakistan and other places where I visited, seaports and river banks, and also it was the seamen's manuals we reviewed for almost 200 years, and the diaries in local dialects. In fact, Rajamanikyam Arunachalam from International Tamil University, Tanjore, were the pioneers in bringing out the historical traditions of navigation as far as South India was concerned, dating back to almost 6000 BCE. Then, and also other regional languages, for which I extensively traveled along the coast of Karnataka to record the experiences of the navigators. And then, numismatics. Numismatics is the study of the coins and the various inscriptions related only to navigation and the folk customs, traditions and beliefs. So in this big background or a very broad canvas, we did the research and published it, several papers in national international papers, and later Rajamanikyam and Arunachalam has come out with a book from Tamil University called the Maritime Traditions of India. Next slide, please. In fact, as far as the inscriptions are concerned, as you find, there are several inscriptions, and the most important inscription, I am only concentrating on the navigational aspect. The Emperor Ashoka had issued a copper plate edict known as Marine Edict. It's very important to get rid of the piracy problem from the Naga rulers at the request of the merchants who were conducting maritime trade. As we see from the latest book published by Rajkumar Sen and others, Foreign Trade During Kautilya's Time, and Arthashastra, where I have contributed an article on foreign trade during Kautilya's time, we find by the time of Kautilya, we had extensive maritime trade which had spanned all over the world. I will show you some of the sea routes in which how our ancient navigators, I don't say sages, definitely navigators, very dynamic and intrepid warriors, could go up to Spain in the west, and actually they could reach none other than Bali Islands. So, in this, he clearly mentions that, and apart from that, the Pallava inscriptions mention that King Narasimha Varman conquered Ceylon with the help of a fleet of ships. The Aihola inscription of King Pulakeshi II states that Pulakeshin attacked Puri, that is probably Elephant Islands as we see now, with his strong navy and defeated the Mauryas of the North Konkan. The Chola king Rajaraja annexed the Lakshadweep and Maldive Islands, and similarly the overseas conquests of Rajendra Chola, called Rajaraja Chola, have been recorded in many inscriptions. One of the inscriptions I saw when I went for an international conference in Bali in 2009. It is in the local dialect. And the inscriptions found in Rajarajeshwara temple at Tanjore, very important, it states that, it is in Tamil but we have translated it in English. King Rajendra Chola dispatched many ships in the midst of the rolling sea against the king of Kadaram and captured him with all his fighting elephants and took away from his huge treasures. Why I am very clear about this fighting elephants is that the ships were so big in those days that it could house a herd of elephants, and there were special place for the elephants to be chained. Now, Nauvarana Mahasana, the word used for that is. And he also conquered the Nicobar Islands, the Malay Peninsula and the Sumatra. The Motupalli pillar inscription of Ganapati Deva assures safety to traders, that is Abhaya Shasana it's called, arriving from all continents, risking sea voyages and hazards like storm attacks and shipwrecks as recorded by Hools in 1982. Next slide please. Next slide. So, as far as the ancient Indian maritime history is concerned, India had contacts with Phoenicians, Assyrians, Greeks, Egyptians, Romans, people of South and Southeast Asia and China also. And very important thing is Ur-Bagas, who was the first king of the United Babylonia, ruled Ur of Chaldeas. It's called Chaldeas. And you find the ruins of Indian teak of the Malabar coast, which date back to 3000 BCE. Means as early as 5000 years ago, our navigators from India along the west coast had gone to Babylonia and other places. Next slide please. And as far as the west was concerned, in the west, our navigators went from the western direction, the western sea coast, through India, from India to Baluchistan, Persia, Arabia, through Red Sea, Suez Canal, and ships stopped at what you call it as Murza or Aden in the west, and Persian Gulf, Tigris and Selunia. This is as early as 300 BCE. Whereas in the east, where they went from Calcutta and other places, Bengal, Burma, Malay Peninsula, East Indies, China. And as we see from the inscriptions in Cambodia where I visited, Hindu colonization of Annam, Kampuchea, Java during the Maurya, Gupta and Harshavardhana, Pallava Narasimha Vishnu, which I have already quoted, and which comes in the Vailar inscription of 700 BCE, 700 CE. So Raja Rajendra Chola I have already mentioned. That means our navigators from the times of the Vedas up to 10th century AD were very dynamic, very aggressive, and had traveled all across the world, all over the world, and there was a fierce trade, and also there were conquests. Next slide please. See, this is what just I wanted to show, a sample of how sea and trade routes in ancient India from both the east and the west. They reached as far off to that Bali Islands, which has 18,000 islands plus islands. They went up to Bali. In fact, in Bali, it's a separate lecture by itself. I have some more slides where Bali is proud that we went there because all their ancestors came from India 2000 years ago. They call themselves as Hindus. 98% of the Bali civilization is Hindu. Next slide, please. So this is another Rome-India trade contacts, how it was established as early as 500 BCE. It's very interesting to note that a Roman scholar has recorded that the silk from India, through the famous Silk Route, from China it came to Gangetic Plain, from Gangetic Plain to Bay of Bengal, and to Dwaraka, from Dwaraka it went up to Spain and Italy. So what happened was that the demand for Indian silk was so fierceful and so powerful, and they were using the muslin, that muslin which can be placed in a small matchbox, and the elegant ladies and the beautiful ladies of Italy wore that, and they were going for an evening walk in the Italian streets, and there was a gate crash. Because of that, it is said that the Cicero of 350 BCE stopped the silk trade between Rome and India. It has been recorded in the inscriptions of Rome. Next slide, please. And this quickly I would like to mention, the Indian and Western references as far as the Indian navigation is concerned, it is Radha Kumar Mukherjee from India, and Lalanji Gopal and Bibi Lal and A.K. Bagh did significant contribution to the study of indigenous traditions of ancient Indian navigation. As far as the West was concerned, Marco Polo, as early as 1300 CE, saw ships made out of Arjuna tree. In botanical names, it's called Terminalia Arjuna, because I'm a student of science. And it had double flanks, and bottoms of ships were smeared with quicklime and oil, and they were planted with nails, because otherwise they were avoiding nails because there were magnetic reefs in the ocean which would attract the ship, leading to shipwreck. So deliberately they were not using these iron nails. In place of that, they were using these wooden nails. That has been mentioned in the Rig Veda. Then he saw crew as big as 300 people. 60 cabins were there in one ship, which Marco Polo saw, which he has recorded. And they were unloading 6,000 bags of pepper called maricham in Sanskrit. They unloaded at Aden. And some of Marco Polo also mentions that there were massive ships going from the western side, that is from Dwaraka, and they were reaching the island of Maliku, Minikoy and other places. Ibn Battuta, another traveler, French traveler, mentions about these things. And Period and Laval of 1500 CE also mentions about the great navigational dimensions and the exploits of Indians. Next slide, please. So Western references, quickly, the Old Testament refers to Tarsha. Tarsha in Old Hebrew means a boat. So it has gone from India. Then Francois Belzar Solvins, he mentions about the navigation. Then John Gross, then Molesworth, Reed, Reverend J. Fox, Professor Bilher, a German Indologist, then Speke, Manning, Pliny. All these people have given significant attributes and glorious tributes to Indians with respect to their navigational pursuits. To just quote what John Gross said, the Indian shipbuilding industry at Surat was very well established indeed. They built incomparably the best ships in the world for duration and of all sizes, with a capacity of over 1,000 tons. Their design appears to be a bit clumsy, but they last for a century. This is the glowing tribute given by John Gross. Then Molesworth and J.L. Reed says, now we are using the compass. In those days, the older Hindu compass seems placed beyond doubt by the Sanskrit word macha yantra, or a fish machine, as earlier as 2000 BCE. Next slide, please. Then what about the word connected with navigation? It was called Nauhu, means navigation. It became Nauka, Pota, Potavaha, Yana, Plava, Tarani. All these words we find in the Rig Veda. Then they were called small boats. Then a very big boat was called Bujja. Bujja means 100-oared boat. That is one of the biggest boats which were built by our sages and seers. In fact, it is said in the Rig Veda, see, Tamuhutar naubhir atma vartibhihi rantarikshat pradur podakabihi tisra kshapastra tirah vrijadbihi narsatya bhujjuhu ahutuhu patangaihi samudrasya dhanvan ardrasya pare tribhirataihi shatapadbihi shallavaihi anarambhane tadivira yetha manasthane agrabhane samudre yadashvina uhatur bhujjamaste shataritram namamatisthavamsam. So this clearly mentions that a king by name Bujju went to the west coast of across the west coast of India, traveled and fought against the marauders and the sea pirates. Next, and later we have what you call it as the Mahaplava, means a very big ship which could accommodate, as seen by Marco Polo, 60 cabins, 6,000 bags of pepper, crew only 300 and so on. Then the Udupa, very simple raft, Next slide, please. So, as far as the navigation in the Vedas are concerned, in the Vedic literature there are several references to sea voyages. Example, the military expedition of Bujju, just now I mentioned, at sea and his rescue by the god Ashwins. Just now I have quoted that verse. Similarly, various types of boats and other related terms have been mentioned in the Rig Veda as enlisted by Ritti in 1988. The later Vedic literature mentions Nauhu, means the boat or ship. Nava means the big ship. Navya means the sailors. And Aritra, I mentioned the word Aritra as old as the times of the Rig Veda, that it is 9,000 years old. See, Shataritram of 100 oars. Shata 100, Aritram oars. Then oarsman, Aritri means the oarsman as reflected by Bag. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. So as far as the Vedic texts are concerned, Lord Varuna was considered as the Lord of the waters. Initially, he was the Lord of the waters, the Samudra Devata. Professor C.L. Prabhakar has written an extensive article on the concept of ocean according to Indian paradigm. Then, he had the knowledge of the sea routes. He had the knowledge of the sea routes as mentioned, which clearly says, Veda yo vinam padamantarikshena patatam vedam navaha samudriyaha. So, here we find that he had references to the Veda, the navigation is there, references to sea voyages and so on. Then there is a terracotta seal from, the seals of the Indus Valley civilization or Indus Saraswati civilization, as S. Kalyan Raman is telling now. It has the insignia of a boat which is as early as 2000 BCE. And there is a word in Rig Veda called Navaprabhamshana, means the shipwreck as referred to in the Atharva Veda. Then Naveva Sukrutuhu means the small boats. See, for example, the famous statement all of you know, Vishwanino Durgaha Jata Vedaha Sindhum Nanama Duritati Pashni. So, Sukrutu. Here we also find the reference to these small boats. Nedam Navaha Samudriya, that I have mentioned, Sindhumna Nava. So these are some of the references we find in the Rig Veda. Next slide, please. So as far as the Brahmana texts are concerned, because I also took into context the Brahmana text which refers to the Vedas, Nau Nagara, there is a mention of Nau Nagara, means the ship town which referred to in Jaiminiya Brahmana, as we have the, ship boat houses in Dal Lake. Then the etymology of the word now, which we collected from the Yaska's Nirukta and the Patanjali's Mahabhashya and that of Panini's Ashtadhyayi, where it says, Natva navam manye yavat tirnam na navyam. It is the Mahabhashya definition or the etymology for the word nauhu or nauka. Then nauhu iti nudyate anena atva anaya. This is what the reference from Buddha Swami's Halayuda Kosha. Then punati iti potaha. Prakriya Kraumudi says, I am trying to give out the why the etymology is required, it also conveys the actual type of the boat that were used by our ancestors. Then, Pota Bali Vahitrayoho is the sutra which is mentioned in the Siddhanta Kaumudi, where Pota refers to small boats. Vahitrayoho refers to the person or the oarsman who holds that boat or who navigate that boat. Then Plavate Anena iti Potavaham is the etymology for the word Potavahaha as given by Kshiraswami. Then Aitareya Brahmana mentions the exploits of Pururava, who conquered 13 islands in the ocean. Yajnavalkya and the Bruhat Samhitas also mention so many maritime courses or the paths which were prevailing in those days. I have already mentioned that the silk came from China in 10,000 BCE and it came through the Tibet, and it also came through the famous Silk Route, and one went through the east coast, the other through the west coast, and reached as far as Italy. Next slide, please. So, as far as the art and architecture is concerned, with respect to the navigation, we find Pliny as 100 CE refers to the craft called Kotanara, which resembles the craft called catamaran. It is in Kannada, it's called Kattumara. Kattumara became catamaran. The same is used now in English. So we have so many words which have been depicted in the various art and architectural symbols across the length and breadth of India, where in Amaravati, Sanchi, Barhut, Ajanta, Aurangabad, Konark, and other places, Puri, as recorded by Delucci. Next slide, please. I have still 8 minutes more. Okay, I started at 2:10. Next slide, please. So I skipped this part. Parts of the boat I told you I have collected words exclusively connected with navigation, all beginning with Nakara. Owing to paucity of time, I'll skip because I have another important thing to mention. Next slide, please. So, navigable routes and voyages called Nauyanam, and it's called Naupatha, and Naupatin means the passage of ships. Navya, Navyajala, Navyanira were called the navigable rivers. Nauyana and Potayatra were the expeditions. And then Nauyana Prabramshana I have already mentioned, and our navigators, ancestors were taking navigation on auspicious days. They avoided Tuesday because of Amangalavaraha Mangalavarasyetha Yatha Naugamanam Shubhadam Shubhavare. They had to do the actual navigation on only other days, and they also avoided the southern direction because it is the god of death. It is the direction of death. Therefore, they say, Nauka Nirajanam Kuryat Dakshinasham Pratishtite. Whenever they were forced to go to travel navigation in South India, they used to do the arati for the ship and also the people and then proceed. Next slide, please. I think we should avoid this. Ancient knowledge of the currents, our ancestors, just 1 minute, they were very well informed about the tides, currents and waves. By observing fishes, color of water birds, rocks, they knew how to determine to which area of sea voyage they should undertake. This I have recorded from the experiences of the navigators, who have a lifetime tradition for more than 2,000 years in Lakshadweep and Minicoy Islands. Next slide, please. And most sea directions they were watching based on the movement of the sun, wind, weather and stellar constellations, and rising sun was an evaluation for proceeding from east to west, whereas the midday sun was an evaluation for them to move from north to south. That's how they planned their navigation across the sea. Next slide, please. And through the stars, we go for the next slide. I have enlisted, they had earmarked totally 56 stars in the sky, in the firmament. Based on the movement of the stars, they used to undertake sea voyages, which I have enlisted in the next slide. Next slide, please. See, these were the basic stars on which they concentrated. Uttara Nakshatra, Kritika, or the Pleiades, by west by night, east by night, Mrigashira, Orion, east and west, Saptarshi Mandalam, the Ursa Majoris, Rohini, Deberon, Makha, Regulus, Kapila, Swati, Arctus. Apart from Dhruva, the pole star. Then they had some planets also, Shukra, Venus, for example, Karkataka, Sagittarius, Bruhaspati, Jupiter, Buddha, Mercury. They moved on the basis of the movements of these stars, and especially that the South Indian navigators concentrated on Dhruva Nakshatra. Next slide. So, and also for landing, how they were landing in those times. Now we have extraordinary latest technology, but how they were doing almost 5,000, 6,000 years ago. It was based on high peaks, shore profiles. The shore changes, the profile of the shore changes. This I learned from O.S. Dawson, the former admiral of the Indian Navy. It's called azimuthal, and also take a ball of sand and mix it with some powder and throw it into the sea by standing at the stern of the sea, and it goes on changing. The color, if it changes, then the sea is very rough. If the color doesn't change, the sea is fine. Likewise, all these things based on those shore profiles, our ancestors did the navigation. Then shore configurations, temple peaks, trees, and the color of the waters. So what I like to drive home the point, it's very short, positive time, 16, 18 months of research and 1,000 pages of matter to be summarized in 20 minutes is a Herculean task, but still I have only concentrated on the times of the Vedas. How? I am proud to say that much before the great voyages began in the West, much before extraordinary voyages were done in the West and they were recorded by the British and the Marco Polo, Vasco da Gama and others, we had a very rich navigational tradition in India, starting from the Rig Veda up to 10th century AD, that of the Dhanapala's Tilakamanjari and Yuktikalpataru of Bhoja. They have mentioned about all these things, which clearly speaks of native tradition, very, very good, outstanding tradition, which was pertaining to that age and which had excelled from other parts of the world. Last but not the least, as far as the conclusion is concerned, India had a very strong maritime tradition as strengthened not just by textual references, but by inscriptions, by numismatics, by the manuals of sea people, and also in the local dialects, and also we collected information from the European manuals belonging to, say, 1000 AD and so on. Based on that, we can clearly say India had a strong maritime tradition. And as far as antiquity of navigational words, as I analyzed, denote Rigvedic and epic periods, that of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but more words belong to classical Sanskrit period, starting from, Ashwagosha, Kalidasa and others. And there was a brisk overseas trade from the Vedic times, I have already mentioned. Indian sailors had their own customs, rituals and practices. Some of them are branded as superstitions by by Western thinkers, but certainly not. They had their own traditions, and they are even being now maintained in Lakshadweep, Minicoy, Andaman, Nicobar Islands, where I visited and also recorded. They sing a song called Ampa songs, because they travel for 7 days, 10 days, 12 days. I traveled for 3 days continuously with the navigators to feel to feel about the sea voyage. And when they are exhausted, we moved on not the speed boats, but on traditional boats oared by the people, And 3 days I traveled. Actually, they sing what you call it as the Ampa songs. These Ampa songs are almost like that of our Lavani. So like this, lot of researches has been done by Arunachalam, Rajamanikyam in Tamil, Keralite traditions. Some days I think we should have a full-fledged seminar only on navigation in the years to come from the Bharati Vidya Bhavan. And I'm pleased to say that the Gandhi Center of Bharati Vidya Bhavan was kind enough to publish my book called Vijnana Tantragnana, where I have mentioned about the contributions of our ancient Indians from the science, from the dimensions of physics, alchemy, botany, zoology, mathematics, astronomy, Ayurveda, navigation, All these have been mentioned. Now it's being translated into Sanskrit by myself and Dr. Y.S. Gayatri. It's being translated to other languages in the country. You can have a feel of that book, where we have given, in a nutshell, the greatest contributions of Indians with respect to sciences as seen, visualized, and recorded by them. Thank you very much for your kind and patient hearing. I offer my grateful thanks to the Bharati Vidya Bhavan and to the ISKCON for giving me an opportunity to share some of my experiences. Thank you.
He has made a good survey of the literature pertaining to navigation. One of the earliest investigations into shipbuilding in ancient India was a book by that very name, Shipbuilding in Ancient India, by Radhakumar Mukherjee. Of course, he has referred to that book and also a number of other books. Right at the outset, he gave a list of his sources, primary and secondary. That is also a mark of sound scholarship. It is only to be expected that India excelled in the navigational sciences, even though the Westerners have tried to play it down. One simple proof required. What is the definition of India given in Vishnu Purana? It says, Uttaram yat samudrasya himadreshchaiva dakshinam varsham tad bharatam nama bharati yatra santatihi. It is above the seas. So on three sides, or at least two sides, going by the shape of the country, so on either side it is covered by oceans, and therefore Indians necessarily needed to have trade contact with other countries, and they did excel in it very well. He has also made a survey of the vocables pertaining to navigation, and the existence of the vocabulary is itself a sound proof of the existence of a sound knowledge regarding the same. So vocabulary cannot be created out of a vacuum, and it is only on account of the needs and exigencies of the situation that a sound vocabulary would be derived. He made a reference to the ship of Bhuju, and now Westerners have tried to derive the same from the Noah's ship, the ark myth that we have in the Bible. And this shows that, see, Westerners have always tried to make things Eurocentric. There is one interesting book called the Plume of the Peacock. So, by one Mr. Abraham. So in that book, he traces the history of mathematics, and he shows how Europeans Westerners in general, have generally ignored all non-European sources of scientific knowledge. So the kind of progress that was made in mathematics by Chinese, by Indians, by Arabs, by Mexicans, all these have been systematically ignored, either relegated to a footnote with a sort of a pejorative comment, or just ignored, so that we must not even be able to know that such things existed. And it is interesting to note that Pliny, the historian, remarks that Indians were master cartographers. Cartography is the art of map making. So Indians were master cartographers. That way, they see at three places you will be in very great difficulty. You will be at sea, to use an English idiom. So where, of course, when you are in a sea, in the midst of a sea, you lose all sense of direction and position. And when you are in the midst of a forest, or when you are in the midst of a desert, you will not know which way to go. It's very difficult. And Indians had this sound knowledge. Dr. Sridhar made a list of the numerous asterisms they had a thorough knowledge of. So this sound knowledge of astronomy that they had. So they knew which asterism would be where. And the sky could be overcast with clouds, and they knew how to wait and how to look for, and the other landmarks that can be possible. All these they had a very good knowledge of. Dr. Sridhar has taken a lot of pains to prepare this article, and he has been lecturing on this very theme for at least 15 years, so in various platforms. Thank you, Dr. Sridhar, for your excellent paper.
Dr. Melkote Sridhar, he is an master MA in Sanskrit, MA English. He's got 2 postdoctoral study theses to his credit. He's a PhD, a doctorate in myths and legends of Mahabharata. At present, he's been the Deputy Director, Publications Wing, Karnataka Sanskrit University, Honorary Dean, Yoga University, Academic Council Member, Yoga University, a Fulbright Scholar, University of South Carolina, Columbia, USA.